Why is there a defense grid around Viron 6? The question cut across the administrative chamber like a dropped blade, interrupting a tide of irrelevant motion reports and procedural amendments. Draken Sir didn't need to look up from his desk. The inquiry wasn't aimed at him, but he already knew the answer, or rather that no one had one. Viron 6 was unprotected by mandate. No known deployment existed. No vote-authorized reinforcement. Yet a containment lattice, blue-laced, nested across orbitals, had blinked onto the Concorde's own tactical feeds at 241 standard. He leaned back, chair creaking with the tension of a body used to sitting too still for too long. Replay the perimeter activation sequence. The command was simple, the response was not. On the laser plasma display above his console, a map of Viron 6 unfolded. The sector's digital terrain cracked open like dry bone, revealing layers beneath. At the edges, 23 anchor points, rotating, seamless, each broadcasting a shield signature that didn't match any Senate registry. "Those aren't ours," murmured Administrator Jarkov from the next bench, his tone stripped of certainty. "Correct," Draken said, his voice flat. "And they're not Roth." Someone behind him cleared their throat, a senior attaché with polished teeth and a clipped accent. Could be a misregistration error, or a failed calibration loop from the Solana archives. Draken tapped a line into the feed. "They use Earth rootframe syntax." Silence, thicker than vacuum, settled over the group. Earth hadn't submitted a defense protocol in 81 years. After the Varick Accords, they'd walked out, left the chair empty, and hadn't sent a delegate since. The only record they updated annually was a single binary pulse, active. Nothing more. "Open a Tier 3 alert to the outer relay oversight," the attaché said quickly, "and notify protocol alignment on Deck 5. Let's isolate this before the chamber hears about it." "They'll hear about it," Draken replied, standing. "It's in the spine logs now. And you know how many failovers that touches." The room began to shift, movement, denial, data tagging. Draken's eyes narrowed at the overhead as the map zoomed into a single node, Anchor 12. It was broadcasting with a buried verification string, a string he recognized. It was the old Terran fallback signature for observational net protocols, meant for dormant assets. But this one was alive. And worse, it was timed. He pulled a separate stream, isolating the pulse frequency. It wasn't randomized. It was stacked in prime intervals, a pattern designed not for detection, but for observation of detection itself. Whoever placed it wanted to watch who noticed. A low tone bled into his earpiece. An unmarked transmission. He blinked. It came through Terran diplomatic channels, long dormant, unregistered on today's priority schema. "We will speak, once. No return path. No origin code." The signal terminated on delivery, like a blade placed on a table, and walked away from. Draken stared at the message. One line. No syntax fluff. No identification. Just inevitability. "Send this to strategic intake." Someone barked behind him. "Flag for counterfeit validation. Earth doesn't transmit." Draken walked out of the room before the debate could splinter. The corridors outside still pulsed with the neutral blue tones of bureaucratic inertia. The lights shifted every 11 seconds, a rhythm designed to calm pacing minds, but his thoughts weren't pacing. They were accelerating. He didn't head to his quarters. He went straight to Archive Deck 7. No one stopped him. He outranked almost everyone who would try. The air on Deck 7 was colder, not from environmental design, but from disuse. Systems blinked slower. Interfaces required tactile contact. The kind of tech that remembered before it updated. He opened the Concorde's Earth interaction files. Layer after layer unrolled, meeting minutes old trade route disputes, silence markers, signal snapshots, all of it dead weight, until he reached entry N0X. It wasn't labeled, but it was date-locked to the exact time the Varick Accords broke. Just a timestamp and a single image of Earth's chair in the Senate, obsidian, smooth, unmarked. No sigil, no backrest, just presence. He stared at the chair. It absorbed light differently, not a trick of rendering, a material function. The alloy used in its composition dampened reflected spectrums, preventing resonance tracebacks. It was built to be seen, but never understood. That was the last thing Earth gave the Senate. A seat no one ever filled, yet no one dared remove. Draken closed the file, logged out, and left the archive. The next morning, he stood in front of Councillor Varin Kess, Senate Chair of Strategic Oversight. The man's robes were simpler than others, blue-gray, lined with logic stripes denoting protocol hierarchy. Kess didn't blink as the message was replayed on the wall-mounted feed. He didn't ask where Draken had retrieved it. He only spoke once it vanished. They waited 81 years to say that. Draken nodded, and they said it in Terran command syntax. Not diplomatic tone, not encoded, not even sanitized. Direct line. Kess exhaled, gaze distant. What does it mean? That something's changed, Draken said, or that something finally reached a threshold we never accounted for. Kess folded his hands. This message will ripple. You know that. Every Concord system will be on alert by end of cycle, and Earth knows that too, Draken said. They always knew more than they shared. That's the problem, Draken replied. We assumed silence meant absence, but I've rechecked the asset audits on 6 outer sectors. At least 2 are showing Terran sub-architecture buried in the energy routing layers, code no one wrote, until now. Kess turned slowly. You want to pursue this? I want to see what they've been waiting to say, Draken said quietly. Kess stared at him for a moment, then gave a nod that felt more like capitulation than approval. Then go. I'll log your departure under Tier 2 exploration clearance. Keep your head down, and if they don't want to speak, they already did, Draken said. The rest is just whether we deserve to hear it. He turned, his boots silent against the soft flooring, mind tracing the way Earth's message had landed, not like thunder, not like heat, like a datum entering a broken machine, slowly correcting the rhythm of a clock that had been lying to itself. In the chamber that night, Earth's seat remained empty, and yet somehow, it felt more present than any voice that had filled the room all day. You weren't cleared for this route, the Concord Port Marshal said, lips thinning as he studied the blank entry stamp on Draken's transit ledger. That's because the route doesn't belong to Concord, Draken replied, his voice stripped of courtesy. It belongs to no one. The Marshal hesitated, glancing at the slate-gray shuttle that had silently detached from the diplomatic dock 10 minutes prior. No pilot manifest, no thrust data, no trajectory archiving, just a corridor of airlock signals that flickered green when Draken approached, then vanished behind him. Now he stood alone on the threshold of a ship without nameplates or identifier codes, encased in an exterior skin darker than blackout paint, material that repelled active scans with algorithmic interference, not deflection. The airlock sealed behind him without motion. There was no sound, not even the pressure equalization his Concord vessels used to reassure nervous passengers. Instead, the light changed. Not a flicker, a slow transition, blue to silver, silver to amber, until the corridor pulsed with a quiet internal rhythm like breath held too long. Walls pressed inward, but not physically. The architecture was just close enough to suggest compression, a narrowing, like walking down a corridor made of intent. He walked. There was no signage, no safety rail, no control console, only a floor that absorbed footfall vibrations before they could echo. The light continued to change as he moved, soft, flickering transitions that never repeated. It was as if the ship refused pattern recognition. After 12 paces, the passage curved sharply and split. A figure stood to the left of the divide. He wore a suit the color of unmarked stone, no insignia, no rank tabs. His helmet was smooth, with a mirrored strip cutting vertically down the center. He didn't move. Draken stopped. Do I keep going? The helmet tilted, only slightly. Draken turned right. No voice confirmed the choice. No map appeared. He wasn't invited. He was simply not refused. The ship changed again. Temperature dropped by degrees, not to discomfort but enough to alert the skin. He felt the moisture evaporate from his palms. The walls shifted into a darker gradient, absorbing surrounding glow. Even the air felt aged, not stale, filtered too many times, like a room that had been closed off, then reopened out of necessity rather than habit. A door stood ahead. It opened without prompt. Inside, a chamber built in segments, each wall lined with headless display pillars, laser plasma columns rotating silent data in vertical bands, flickering only when passed by motion. The ceiling was curved inward, arching toward a central recess with no seating, no table, only a ring of pale light embedded in the floor. "Envoy, sir." The voice came from the far wall. A man stepped out of shadow, not concealed, just unaccounted for. He was tall, lean, with hair clipped close to the scalp and irises that looked almost gray in this light, not storm gray, drought gray, the color of time that had decided to wait in one man's bones. "Allreth Dovak," the man said. "You've been expected." "Expected by who?" Draken asked, keeping his posture still. Dovak's lips curled faintly, not amusement, not disdain, something else. "By the system." He gestured, and one of the display columns shifted, revealing a series of projection nodes spiraling downward like anchors, each one activated with a flick of his fingers. "I'm not here under formal authorization," Draken said, walking toward the data sphere now building itself between them. "Earth doesn't operate under Concord authorization," Dovak replied. "Not anymore." A soft chime ticked beneath the platform. The floor reconfigured, no movement, just a change in depth as if reality had subtly relented. Another figure emerged from the opposite corridor. This one wore a dull black command coat, creased at the cuffs, sleeves rolled halfway, a collar band without unit symbol, stitched in thread that shimmered subtly as he moved. "Commander Halvan," Dovak introduced, stepping aside. "Shadow Directive. Echo Vault Operations." Halvan didn't speak at first. He looked at Draken like a weapons technician inspecting a system for hidden faults. "You still think your Senate's in control," he said eventually. "It's not your fault, it's the framework you were born into, but that framework's been overwritten." Draken narrowed his eyes. "Overwritten by what?" "Pattern-based surveillance architecture," Halvan replied, "embedded across 21 Senate-flagged regions. You've called them sensor ghosts, background chatter, calibration artifacts. They've been tracking proximity violations for 71 years. That's a violation of Accord boundaries." "No," Dovak said, calm. "It's a response to Accord blind spots. You built a system with no teeth. We built one that noticed." Draken stared at the simulation hovering between them. It showed an array of outer systems, red markers tagging foreign incursions, green tags rotating above evacuation lines, and then blue indicators. Everywhere. Not around Earth. Around them. "These are defense lines." "No," Halvan said, "these are fail points." Draken stepped forward. The data streams adjusted to his motion. One quadrant lit up. "Concord Sector 19, Viron 6, he said aloud. "Anchor grid deployment. Complete 63 hours before your Senate noticed." Dovak added, "We didn't activate, we prepared. You embedded systems in our network. We embedded them in yours because you built your network on Earth's architecture. You forgot we designed the spine. You just repainted the shell." Draken turned, suddenly aware of how far he'd come, not in space but in understanding. "What are you expecting?" "We're not expecting," Dovak answered. "We've already calculated. And if I tell the Senate," "Tell them," Halvan said. "Tell them we never stepped away. We just never asked permission to stay." Draken looked down at the floor, then back to the simulation. The structure had changed. He hadn't noticed when. It now showed a Roth vector curve, incoming, already past the warning arc. "How long?" he asked. 4 cycles, maybe less," Halvan said. "They don't speak, they don't negotiate, they just collapse structure. We've modeled them 37 times. Only one outcome produces survival. Does that outcome involve Senate fleets?" Halvan blinked once. "No, it involves you leaving now." Draken turned slowly. The exit corridor was already open, not welcoming, not lit, just open. He stepped into it, each stride a question without a guaranteed answer. Behind him, the chamber dimmed. No alarms, no declarations, only silence. And in that silence, Earth's message remained untouched. "We will speak, once." "They knew our timelines before we did," Dovak said, gesturing toward the array of heads-up displays as they blinked into alignment. The chamber was darker now, not from shadow but from saturation. Data layers suspended in laser plasma rings overhead, flickering through projected combat probabilities, reaction loops, command stress points. No one stood at a console. No one adjusted controls. The simulation ran itself. Draken stood in the center of a domed projection bay, surrounded by concentric bands of scenario playback. There were no chairs, no annotations, no handrails, just space meant for stillness. He spoke without looking away from the nearest display. "You've modeled our fleet doctrines, not just doctrines," Halvan corrected from the side alcove. "We modeled your panic." The word landed harder than expected. On the nearest screen, A Senate fleet responded to a Roth breach alert in System Axiom 12. 17 minutes passed before the vote to escalate cleared quorum. Deployment arrived 90 seconds after the final colony transmission cut out. The simulation ended with a fleet orbiting nothing. 17 minutes, Draken repeated. You used live legislative timings. Halfin stepped closer, his boots soundless on the reinforced flooring. Everything we needed was in your archived votes. Every delay, every hesitation logged in public record. Another display spun up. This time the Roth didn't attack directly. A corridor of communication nodes flickered, each one dropping from sync. By the fourth, internal routing logic failed. A regional relay collapsed, triggering protocol misroutes across adjacent systems. The fleet scrambled, in circles. That's not a military strike, Draken said. That's a structural incision. It's how they test response velocity, Dovak added. They don't need to win. They just need to prove you can't respond fast enough. And you modeled this 71 times, Halfin answered, eyes fixed on the central ring. Only one model showed survival across core systems. Draken turned to him. Which one? The one where Earth didn't ask for permission. The air felt thinner now, as if the simulations were pressing inward, less like information, and more like prophecy. Draken stepped forward, tilting his head toward a quadrant, marked with cascading timelines. Show me how, he said, without voice command. A final display opened. No fanfare, no stinger, just a flat black interface laced with red indicator streams, each one marked by rotating code blocks and time-stamped logic loops. At the bottom, 3 initials burned into a data watermark, CSOL, Command Syntax Overwrite Layer, Halfin said. It's not a weapon, it's an embedded fallback. The simulation continued. Draken watched as a Senate override attempt faltered mid-deployment. Every panel dimmed. Tactical AI loops reinitialized with root frame fallback. New command prompts appeared, brief, unaligned, stripped of Senate signatures. Who gave the fallback keys? Draken asked, though the answer clawed at his thoughts already. Earth wrote the registry backbone during Concord's formation, Dovak said calmly. Nobody noticed we retained the sandbox layers. They were meant for stabilization after protocol failures. Over time you forgot to check who actually authored the root layers. Draken's hands tightened. His own system, his own office terminal, ran on an Earth-derived architecture. Every input he'd logged for 12 years had passed through a framework he'd never questioned. You're saying the Senate runs on Earth's spine? Halfin tilted his head. No, we're saying the Senate runs because Earth never let it crash. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It had weight, the kind of stillness that follows an irreversible truth. Draken paced toward a smaller feed, hands behind his back. What if I report this? What if I flag it? Dovak raised one brow. You already triggered Tier 4 containment by stepping into this simulation. Your transmission protocols are currently in a time-dilated echo loop. If you send anything, it'll reach the Senate 6 hours after the breach completes. Draken blinked. You're saying I can't warn them? I'm saying Earth already has, Halfin said, turning toward the exit corridor. They didn't hear it. On another feed, the CSOL interface pulsed. An alert blipped into view. Senate deployment request received. Response delay, 1432. Collapse vector, confirmed. Draken stared at it. Why show me this? He asked quietly. Dovak's answer came slowly. Because now you've seen it, and knowing what's coming will break you slower than watching it arrive. The simulation shifted again, now projecting the Concorde central loop. Subsystems blinked with false positives. Administrative reroutes looped themselves. The system showed full operational compliance, but no signal was reaching outer sectors. Draken's spine stiffened. That's impossible. I just filed a multipath relay through Senate this morning, and it's still waiting for route verification, Halfin said. Your system is running a latency loop seeded by the CSOL, passive only. It allows full internal simulation of outbound message structure. You're seeing a loop, not a link. The implication burrowed deep. His words, his reports, his access, none of it had left. On one of the peripheral displays, time to collapse gauges began counting down from 15 minutes. On another, green perimeter nodes turned amber. In silence, the chamber pulsed with overlays of systems Draken had spent years reviewing from a distance, each now color-coded for failure. He whispered, "You knew the breach was inevitable." Halfin turned. "We didn't just know, we documented the day it would be. And you didn't stop it. We were never meant to stop it, Dovak said. The lights above dimmed slightly. We were meant to be necessary when no one else could be. Draken exhaled slowly, his breath catching against the sharp coldness of the air. The room no longer felt like a place of data. It felt like a vault, not of knowledge but of admission. He turned to leave, but the door didn't open. A different feed spun into place. It showed his own name, a request timestamp, a roll tag. Under it, clearance denied, shadow protocol active. Draken stood very still. He had become part of the doctrine, not a visitor, not a witness, a condition. The room dimmed further. The CSOL interface pulsed once more, and Earth watched. Clause 9D. Trigger. Multi-party. Exclusion detected. The voice came from nowhere. It had no tone, no cadence, no origin. It was language stripped bare, delivered not to be heard but obeyed. Inside the Grand Hall of Concord, the chamber lights dimmed mid-sentence. Senator Borenvek had been mid-debate, arguing the illegitimacy of Earth's observational grid, when the floor beneath the council dais blinked red. Every seat interface froze. A ripple of confusion rose as panels failed to respond, voice commands returned null, and even the ambient climate stabilizers shifted out of sync, like the room itself had stopped acknowledging authority. On the central dais, the Earth seat, long unoccupied, projected a single glyph across its curved backing, 3 interlocking arcs, each bent inward, looping into one another like a knot made of absence. Triarch 21 had spoken, and nothing in the Senate had clearance to respond. Draken Sur entered moments later, unannounced, unscheduled. No aid blocked him. No security protocol fired. The doors had opened not with ceremony but out of obligation. He moved through the rows of confused dignitaries, like a figure in someone else's memory. His coat still carried the data threads from Echo Vault Zero, glowing faintly with passive sync pulses. The chair recognized him. The room did not. Counselor Voren Kess stood, jaw rigid. What is this? Who authorized a seizure of network control? The lights answered instead of Draken. A new display activated on every council armature, laser plasma rings displaying a cascading stream of old treaty code. Voric Annex 9, Section D, Line 12. Ownership clause of summit infrastructure in event of multi-party suspension. Every system flashed one word. Overwritten. Skell rose slowly from the back row. Until now, he had not spoken. A procedural clerk from Earth's pre-withdrawal period, thought irrelevant, never reassigned, never dismissed. He was a presence no one questioned because he had never requested anything. His voice was quiet, but in a chamber stripped of response, it was the only voice that functioned. Per Article 9, Subsection D, Earth resumes administrative custody of Concordal Summit architecture due to procedural breach, failure to include Earth in wartime protocols while using their structural codebase. Custody, Kess snapped. This is seizure. No, Skell replied, stepping forward. This is restoration. On the walls, each system node blinked once, then flipped from Concord Blue to Earth's grayscale directive band. The transition was immediate, silent, inevitable. Senator Narn slammed his hand onto his console. I'm invoking Emergency Session Article 12. The console ignored him. Draken stepped into the core tier, eyes on the shifting display above. It no longer showed the chamber itself but the ledger, the summit's digital spine, a legal chronograph that recorded all power transfer, all protocol handshakes, all authorship of state action. The lines began to rewrite. Line 1, Convening Authority, Earth. Line 2, Session Owner, Earth. Line 3, Arbitration Clause, closed. Panic had begun to smolder behind the rows of ornate robes, flared sashes, council seals. Their trappings couldn't interface with the feed. They had no voice left, not in this framework. Draken turned to face the body of the chamber. Earth never removed its architecture. You did, in votes, not in systems. You're complicit, Vec growled. This is strategic coercion. No, Skell said again, his tone unchanged. This is structural auditing. You failed to inform Earth of 7 defense escalations, despite Earth's systems hosting 4 of the relay chains involved. We are the Council, Narn barked. No longer, Triarch 21 replied. For the first time, the Council chamber's environmental hum stilled completely. Even the background harmonics, subtle air modulation, biometric taps, ceased. The summit had entered audit lock. All comm traffic rerouted. Emergency signals delayed. No outbound transmissions permitted. This violates everything we built, Skell asked softly. We built it. On the central column, a final string populated. Authority matrix transfer. Executor. Earth. Kess moved to speak but stopped. His console still blinked, frozen. A hollow flicker of power, no function. Skell raised his left hand. A command band, dull gray, shimmered once. Behind him, the overhead projection rendered a real-time visualization of the Council's original formation vote, drawn from archival chain data. Every signature, every clause, the Earth seat's abstention was shown, but beneath it, a legal string had sat dormant for 81 years. Clause 9D, activated upon the convergence of three conditions: exclusion from security deliberations, detected unauthorized use of Earth code systems, and failure to acknowledge Earth's data flag in an active breach scenario. All three conditions now glowed. Why now? Kess finally asked. Skell looked at Draken, then back to the silent feed. Because you mistook our absence for withdrawal. It wasn't either. Laser plasma interfaces folded back into their vault shells, locking into display only. Every seat, except Earth's, dimmed to standby. Only one feed remained active, a single line across the summit core. Clause 9D, ownership status, Earth encoded. Draken exhaled, the air sharp against his throat. The chair was no longer empty, not filled either. It was engaged. Outside the chamber, comm restrictors blinked red. Inside, no one stood. There was nowhere left to stand. Protocol 11C overrides the audit, Senator Trevek Narn declared, stabbing a sequence into his control pad. Earth cannot operate military functions under suspended quorum. The heads-up display embedded in his seat blinked once, then collapsed into static. Across the grand chamber, other delegates looked down at their consoles, hesitating, watching status rings flatten into null symbols. A few reached for comms, but no channel opened. The platform's uplink routes flickered amber, then black. It wasn't delay. It wasn't congestion. It was removal. In Concord Military Command, far above the planetary belt, Earth's White Veil fleet rotated silently into formation. 12 anchor vessels emerging from pre-positioned hold vectors across Sector Virex. They didn't transmit ID strings. They didn't align with Concord paths. Their trajectories didn't arc. They folded. Fold spike pattern 7, a geometry lock, initiated across four-dimensional drift space, engineered not to destroy, but to hold. Inside the Senate, Narn stood abruptly. This is unauthorized. Initiate procedural rollback. Skell, still seated beneath the projection tier, did not turn. He simply raised one hand, and every Senate uplink, communications, admin, tactical link routing, shifted to audit read-only mode. Draken watched the chamber darken, not in light but in relevance. Outside, Earth's ships aligned without thrusters, their movements coordinated through a lattice that extended beneath conventional perception. White hulls, unadorned, except for a single ringed glyph on each side, a hollow arc nested inside a silent crescent. No transmission acknowledged their presence. They weren't broadcasting to impress. They were there to end a problem before permission caught up. Reset this now, Kess muttered, voice low, eyes on the blinking wall where Concord defense layers should have been updating. We're the governing structure. We control authorization. Skell finally spoke. You never controlled the syntax. Inside the Earth command node at orbit elevation, Commander Halvin issued no verbal orders. The operations team didn't speak. Their eyes flicked between rapidly folding lattice outputs and cascade sinks. One tech raised a finger, not in signal, but in acknowledgement. The moment had arrived. At that precise instant, the Senate's military routing schema fractured, not visually, not with warning. It simply reorganized. Layers blinked out of sequence, then realigned beneath a different authority structure. Earth's registry keys lit up through buried coalition strata, keys that had never been revoked, because no one ever thought to look for them. Narn lunged for manual override. His input returned a line of silent glyphs, CSOL active. The command syntax overwrite layer had engaged. Back in low orbit, Earth's formation was complete. The geometry net finished folding. The Roth spearhead, 12 ships advancing across a hostile vector, sliced through aligned sectors. Then they stopped, not due to impact, not from force, but because the space they depended on no longer moved. Fold spike pattern 7 locked them mid-shift. Their propulsion signatures flickered, then flattened. Their formation logic collapsed inward. One vessel disappeared. Another twisted. Its shadow lagged a full second behind its hull. Internal routing failed. Sensors looped false pathways. They weren't under attack. They were being erased from motion. Inside the chamber, redacted voting panels glowed blankly. Every key attempt returned a mirrored line. Input invalid. Authority layer shifted. A murmur began, low, crawling up the marble walls like heat from the floor. "What is this?" Counselor Farvex asked, voice cracking. Draken stepped forward. "This is Earth's fallback engagement, the system you forgot you relied on." Vec turned, snarling. "This is a coup." "No," Skell said. "This is a response to a mission." Across the command net, the geometry trap sealed. Roth ships were now data fragments, held not by mass, but by error. Motion became recursion. Fire control loops turned inward. Trajectory logs lost anchoring. Nothing exploded. Nothing broke. There were no shards. There was only silence and containment. Earth had ended the threat through syntax, not steel. "Seize their network control immediately," Narn shouted. But there was no system left to answer him. The chamber now mirrored only one feed, the CSOL interface, rotating, dark gray on obsidian backing, text rendered in Earth's original authority, encoding. Each line blinked once, then locked. Command pathway, Earth A9, override layer validated. Senate access, view only. Draken turned to face the rows of seated officials. "You tried to vote Earth out of a war. They were already ending it, while you drafted the motion." A quiet alert echoed across every surface, subsonic, almost a whisper. It came not from Earth, but from the breach perimeter. A new Roth vessel appeared, larger, denser, its logic path fractured on arrival, like a mind arriving through a language it hadn't finished learning. But the geometry trap was still live. White Veil Fleet didn't flinch. The anchor ships realigned, recalculated the field, and the structure held. The new vessel veered, its onboard navigation, trying to find direction in a space that no longer obeyed causality. Inside the Senate, the alert echoed again. Counselor Vorin, Kess closed his eyes, not in prayer, in resignation. Skell stood now, calm, even. "You asked Earth to sit quietly while you held the summit." Earth agreed. "They never stood. They encoded the floor beneath your feet." The final display turned black. "Not powered down," claimed. One line remained. Command not shared, only deferred, and Earth had stopped deferring. They said nothing. Draken started, voice steady as he stepped into the Senate's upper gallery. "And that silence filled more command space than any of your fleets have touched in 6 cycles." A dozen council members turned, some out of reflex, others to signal disapproval. The chamber was already thick with procedural posturing, debate threads overlapping into a barely structured spiral of contradiction. 2 heads-up displays had crashed in the western arc. No one acknowledged it. Draken tapped the command pad on his wrist. A laser plasma column unfolded beside him, casting motionless light against the floor. "Observe." Time-stamped predictive overlays from Earth's operational doctrine. "This isn't simulation. It's calibration playback." The feed initiated with no cue tones. The first sequence mapped Routh advance vectors against Senate fleet response delays across Sector Ixon. Reaction lagged 13 minutes, 37 seconds. The simulation clipped directly into projected outcomes: civilian displacement failures, orbital relay implosions, and command delay fractures. It ended on a flat line. "Now," Draken said, "watch the time alignment." He gestured. The display adjusted, layering Earth's actual intervention logs across the same frame. White veil movements, silent relay captures, fold vector realignments. Every action aligned with Earth's model, down to the second. Senator Vex stood, robes shifting against the hard light. "Predictive combat strategies are not admissible justification for unilateral deployment." "No," Draken replied, "but real-time parity with enemy action is. You're not voting on theory. You're trying to vote faster than reality permits. We were not briefed on Earth's operation windows, Kess interjected from the tier above. You weren't invited to them, Draken said, unflinching. Because the doctrine you operate by was already deprecated before this war began. Counselor Narn activated his terminal. This body rejects the assumption of military authority by any unaffiliated entity. The vote initialized, color lines streamed across the perimeter rails, blue for agreement, amber for abstain, crimson for dissent. Mid-tally, the primary chamber feed twitched, a soft distortion, the kind that slipped past diagnostics. Several displays blinked, then returned with one update. System alert, Concord node, Viral 5 unreachable. Senator Heck's assistant leaned close, whispering. Heck froze. Another alert followed. Secondary contact loss, Durrell relay array. Draken didn't need to narrate. He let the screen shift. Earth's doctrine had already logged the failure curve 6 weeks ago. Same sectors, same method, same silence. You're watching your own irrelevance unfold, he said, stepping off the projection pad. And you still think you can outvote contingency. Narn's face was pale now, but his voice held. Then what do you propose, Envoy Sir? That we submit to unregulated defense by a former member? No, Draken answered, turning slowly. I'm suggesting you acknowledge that they're not submitting reports, because they've already solved the equation you're still trying to define. Another delegate, Counselor Varick, rose. There are principles, then bury them in the calm blackouts. Draken said, they won't help you filter what's coming. Another feed emerged unbidden. Earth's, no header, no signature, just a single real-time mapping layer, fleet formations nested beyond the Routh's known retreat vectors. The ships weren't waiting. They were already in path offset mode, flanking from anticipation, not response. Your warboard doesn't show those positions, Draken noted, because your warboard is written in consensus. Earth's is written in convergence. Counselor Farvex leaned into his seat. How did they know the vector shift? They didn't need to, Draken said. They built the failure zones into your command infrastructure. Then they waited to see who would notice. The chamber fell into motion again, but it was scattered now. Voices overlapped, signals clipped, delegates reached for resets. The central tier's interface flared once, then dimmed. No override request succeeded. From above, Skell stood unprompted. Earth's protocol isn't reaction, it's recursion. His tone wasn't defiant, it was final. Counselor Vex stepped back, slowly lowering his console visor. They've written the ending. No, Draken replied. They've already archived it. The chamber's central lighting system dimmed, not from failure, but from sequence handoff. Every display blinked twice. A soft mechanical sound followed, the drop click of access keys transferring to passive observation mode. Earth hadn't argued. Earth hadn't replied. Earth had simply moved, and Concord had voted itself into silence. Node collapse confirmed. Target logic unsynced. Commander Halvin's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. His words moved the room the way gravity moves matter, silently, inescapably. The heads-up interface above the command ring displayed the containment prism still rotating around the locked Roth cruiser, its engines lit but blind. Internally, the ship was still attempting maneuver correction. Externally, it hadn't changed position in 3 minutes. Veil 9, one of Earth's White Veil vessels, held orbit a few thousand clicks off the cruiser's axis. It emitted no targeting lasers, no propulsion noise, just a tetherless field modulation that inverted the local gravity mesh around the target. The enemy's motion looped like a needle skipping across a broken track, an orbital path rewritten into recursive pause. Halvin tapped his sleeve once. Begin prism contraction. Loop duration no longer increasing. No flashes, no warning. The prism began to fold. Back in Concord Command, 3 analysts tried to translate what they were seeing. One of them, a Senate liaison with 12 years in sensor intelligence, simply turned off her panel and sat back. That ship's already gone, she murmured. It just doesn't know it yet. Earth's protocols didn't fire weapons. They replaced expectations. In Detra system, the second containment played out. Concord satellites continued to pulse wide-angle scans into void space, searching for Roth exfil vectors. Every scan returned blank, but the enemy hadn't vanished. Earth's mass field veilers had activated 2 hours earlier. The system's orbital frame shimmered, edges warped like curved glass under pressure. Outbound trajectories, once stable, no longer completed their calculations. Ships approaching warp thresholds found their vectors subtly shifting, nothing dramatic, just enough to make light misbehave. 6 enemy vessels floated within that curtain of distortion. Their captains believed they were still mobile. Their helm logs confirmed forward motion. Yet to any external system, their position hadn't shifted in 7 minutes. They weren't cloaked. They weren't shielded. They were unsolved. Aboard Veil 3, positioned behind the 4th ring of Saturn's broken analogs, Earth techs reviewed the algorithmic velocity mismatch. The Vilar grid hadn't even fully deployed yet. That wasn't necessary. Half activation scrambled any outbound navigational schema still running Concord standard code. The enemy, unfamiliar with Earth's modified mass resonance frequencies, never stood a chance. Route interruption holding, said the systems specialist at the helm. Collapse frequency. Staggered. They'll never find their exit. Meanwhile, in Breland's upper atmosphere, no ships were visible, but the sky was wrong. Clouds bent into concentric waves, barely moving. Electromagnetic resonance showed consistent fluctuations in the ionosphere, not enough to alarm Concord weather analytics, but more than enough to rewrite terrain reflection geometry. Earth's atmospheric reprogramming beacons, planted weeks in advance, were fully active. There had been no announcement, no request for airspace control, just a layered signal injected into the upper layers of the sky, a lattice of programmable wind and heat differential zones. Any ship entering the space would experience false terrain reflections, ranging errors, and altitude delays. The first Roth dropship experienced all 3. It came in low over Sector Delta, sensors reading a flat, clear descent corridor. What it actually crossed was a terrain scaffold redirected by beam array illusion. The ship's gravity alignment fired too late. The drop vector dipped, and then it folded, right into an angle that no longer existed. There was no impact, no explosion. The vessel disappeared between atmospheric echoes, never reaching the surface. Below, ground station feeds showed nothing more than untroubled wind corridors and an adjusted electromagnetic signature. No alarms tripped, no threat registered. Back in the Senate observation deck, Draken stood in silence. The feed displayed all 3 systems across a segmented plasma wall, each quadrant running asynchronous footage. Nothing overlapped, no frame repeated. 3 theaters, he said quietly, speaking for no one in particular. No weapons deployed, no fleets mobilized, no diplomatic warnings sent. Voron Kess watched from the council floor, hands clenched at his sides. How long have they planned this? They didn't plan it, Draken said. They structured for it. One of the feeds shifted. In Detra, a Roth vessel pinged its allied beacon 3 times in succession. The return signal never reached it. A moment later, the beacon pinged back, at itself. Containment complete, said Halvan, from Earth Command. Transitioning to passive feedback. Units will age in loop state. In the Senate, some members still stared at the screens, trying to identify attack patterns that didn't exist. Others simply sat back, breathing like they were learning how for the first time. These aren't battles, said Counselor Varick. These are closures. No, Draken replied. They're preemptions, and we weren't even notified. Outside, Earth's White Veil fleet folded away from Brelan. No signal sent, no message broadcast. They weren't retreating. They were never supposed to be seen. The systems they left behind were quiet, whole, untouched. But every path out had been erased, and Earth hadn't just ended a conflict. They had erased the invitation to participate in one. Draken watched the final status line flicker into place on the central display. Earth, silent, ended. He felt nothing, but the chamber around him stilled, as if the Senate itself had finally realized what had been happening, what had always been happening. Beneath the layers of debate, the endless motions. The Earth seat, empty, but never vacant, loomed over them like a forgotten prophecy, echoing their failure to heed its absence. The last signal from Earth flickered briefly, a single line on every screen. No grand announcement, no fanfare. We never withdrew. We embedded. It was over. Draken spoke without looking at the council, his voice sharp and final. You thought the seat was empty. It was full of time you wasted. The stillness in the room was palpable, but not in the way they imagined, not in the way that invited reflection. No, this was a silence that demanded nothing. It just stood solid in its refusal to give them anything to hold on to. The council debated in the background, frantic now. Plans scrambled, proposed amendments, an attempt to formalize Earth's involvement, a legal maneuver born of desperation, of denial, a hollow suggestion. The screen above flickered to life again, but not with Earth's name, no signature, no anthem, just empty space. The camera panned across the council hall, a futile gesture toward governance, now obsolete, the seats, their vacant echoes. The arguments now strangled by their own irrelevance. They had spent centuries deciding how to include Earth, debating its voice, its place at the table, but the table had been theirs to control. The seat, always a reminder they had ignored. Outside the chamber, the star fields were cold. The familiar hum of Senate control was absent. No fleets, no ships, no Earth formations in sight. They had already disappeared, a simple fact concealed by the constant pull of self-importance within the walls of this crumbling institution. Draken, Kess's voice cracked across the room, desperate now, searching for an opening, for something to cling to. "You're too late," Draken replied, his gaze unwavering, his voice not a challenge, but a final statement. "Earth didn't need to sit here to be part of this galaxy. They already wrote it in the margins of your decisions, in every protocol you passed, in every hesitation you ignored. You just didn't listen." The white light of the empty Earth seat dimmed further, as if even it could no longer endure the farce. There was no symbolic gesture, no applause, no finale. The seat was gone, not physically, but metaphysically. The Senate had seen it as a relic, but now it was a symbol of what they had failed to understand, what they would never be allowed to forget. And Earth? Earth was beyond their reach now. "We should have," Kess started, but the words died on his lips, as all the others had before him. There were no more words, no more attempts to explain, to justify, no defense left to offer. Draken turned back toward the projection. The empty starfields were no longer just an absence. They had become the space Earth had claimed, the space they had chosen to leave behind. "You thought it was an insult," Draken continued, his voice now quieter but resolute. "The seat was never for you, it was for the time you ignored, for the steps you took while you thought nothing was happening." Behind him, the final data feed from Earth opened, a single real-time fleet positioning chart, no further explanation, no added detail, just a precise quiet vector, a future no one had anticipated. Earth's fleet was still there, at the edge of known space, hidden from view, outside the reach of systems that had long thought themselves sovereign. The Senate would never find them again, not because they were lost, but because they had already been left behind. Draken watched as the council argued, as they moved to vote once again. Their final effort to formalize Earth's place was coming too late, and he knew it. But by the time the vote was in motion, Earth was already gone. Outside, the vastness of space stretched into cold infinity. Earth's ships, silent, hidden, had already disappeared into folds of space, to places no one else had thought to chart. No distress signal, no exit. They didn't need to explain. Earth had never needed permission. For a long moment, Draken stood alone in the Senate chamber, as the debate swirled around him. The Senate's words, their grand gestures, meaningless, empty. It was over. They had not been invited to the war they had tried to prevent. And Earth? Earth had never sought to join it. All the Senate had done was waste time. "I told you," Draken muttered softly to himself. "You never listened." A broken chain symbol appeared on the final feed. It was small, inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but it was fitting. The broken chain was all that was left of the Senate's authority, a symbol of something that had once been but no longer existed. For the first time in his life, Draken felt the weight of a true final silence. The Senate, with all its grandeur, had become a relic. Earth had never needed it. They had always known the galaxy would bend to their preparation, not their diplomacy, and now it was too late for anyone to catch up. Draken turned his back on the hall, walking out to where the cold of the stars stretched infinitely beyond. The Senate had been forgotten. Earth had always known what would happen when they stopped talking. They just left, and the galaxy finally understood why.